Princess Diana's life was no fairy tale, and behind the gilded gates and manicured gardens of the palace, tensions simmered for years between her and key members of the royal family. Many of these conflicts remained carefully concealed from the public, never fully exposed in headlines that favored elegant appearances over difficult truths. While many people think they understand her disagreements with King Charles, the reality is that Diana's struggles ran far deeper, extending well beyond the issues that made it into newspapers and interviews. From private clashes with the Queen herself to unsettling moments that unnerved even those who supported her, these hidden stories provide a different lens through which to view her life, illuminating the corridors of power in ways we never imagined. For years, quiet whispers hinted at these conflicts, but they remained only partially understood, overshadowed by the myth of the glamorous princess. Today, revisiting these episodes allows us to recognize the complex layers of tradition, personal anguish, and shifting cultural expectations that defined her experience. One of the most private yet significant moments in Diana's tumultuous relationship with the royal family emerged as a direct confrontation with Queen Elizabeth. Diana's marriage to King Charles was unraveling, the scaffolding of a carefully constructed royal narrative collapsing under the weight of emotional neglect and personal betrayal. Behind the scenes, Diana felt unsupported and misunderstood, especially by the Queen, who traditionally remained reserved and cautious. According to insiders, Diana eventually found the courage to voice her frustrations directly to the monarch. This meeting took place in absolute privacy, far from the cameras that had so long shaped Diana's public image. It reportedly centered on her deteriorating marriage and her perception that the Queen's lack of intervention left her feeling trapped in a loveless union. Diana's emotional appeal, brimming with raw vulnerability, failed to yield the comfort or allyship she yearned for. Instead, the meeting, cloaked in silence by palace insiders, only intensified Diana's sense of isolation. It revealed a stark divide. On one side stood the traditional monarchy, cautious and stoic. On the other, a princess fighting to have her voice heard. The tension crackled in the air that day, a reminder that while the monarchy's centuries-old rituals claimed to value unity, the human heart within those traditions could still be left desperately alone. Diana's struggles did not end at the Queen's door. Prince Philip, known for his forthright manner and unapologetically blunt opinions, initially welcomed Diana, hoping her youth and popularity would bolster Charles and modernize the family's image. But over time, his patience frayed. He grew frustrated with how Diana handled the media and her public role, finding her approach at odds with the family's controlled presentation. At a family gathering, an event that should have reflected unity and decorum, an explosive argument broke out between Diana and Philip. It all centered on Philip's perceived harshness toward Diana, his relentless pressure for her to adhere more strictly to royal conventions, and his displeasure at her emotional candor. Diana, never one to submit quietly, once pushed too far, defended herself passionately. She accused Philip of lacking empathy, of failing to understand her plight in a stifling environment. He, in turn, remained unmoved, holding fast to his belief that tradition and duty stood above personal comfort or public sympathy. The exchange left lasting scars. From that moment on, Diana and Philip shared a frosty distance, each wary and wounded by the encounter. This stark rift exemplified the gap between Diana's desire for heartfelt connection and the royal family's entrenched system that prized stoicism and compliance over authenticity. In these conflicts, one with the Queen behind closed doors, another with Prince Philip under the watchful eyes of other family members, Diana's difficulties become a window into broader historical and cultural tensions. The late 20th century saw a British monarchy grappling with a world increasingly shaped by media transparency and the rise of personal storytelling over impersonal ritual. Diana represented a new chapter, one defined by emotional engagement with the public and a rejection of pure formality. Many senior royals, raised in an era where discretion and duty were paramount, struggled to comprehend or accept this evolution. The result was a quiet battle of wills, an unspoken war of values. Diana embodied a humanitarian warmth that resonated with everyday people, but challenged the palace's carefully guarded mystique. She wanted acknowledgement of her pain and intervention in her troubled marriage, but tradition demanded stoic silence. She yearned for understanding and support, but found herself met with formality and detachment. When we place these stories in their historical context, we see a monarchy at a crossroads. The old guard, represented by figures like Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip, had weathered wars, abdications, and changing social mores by maintaining a steady hand and a firm grip on precedent. Diana's arrival represented a new era of celebrity culture, the blossoming of tabloids, and a public thirst for authenticity and vulnerability. She struggled not merely with family members as individuals, but with an institution that resisted rapid change. The Queen, who had guided the monarchy through decades of social transformation, found herself confronted by a daughter-in-law who wanted more than just guidance. She wanted empathy. Prince Philip, a product of early 20th century aristocratic codes, saw Diana's directness and emotional openness as breaches in the hull of a grand old ship, threatening to let in turbulent waters. These unseen struggles deepen our understanding of why Diana's story resonates so strongly, even decades after her passing. They show that beneath the polished ceremonies, royal weddings, and official tours, real people wrestled with clashing worldviews. Diana's conflicts with the Queen and Prince Philip were not isolated spats, but symbolic events that highlighted the monarchy's limits. Diana was signaling that times had changed, that moral support and emotional expression could no longer be smothered by duty and silence. The Queen, bound by centuries-old protocols, and Prince Philip, the staunch traditionalist, struggled to adapt. The resulting fractures foretold the monarchy's need to evolve if it wished to maintain public trust and relevance in a rapidly shifting cultural landscape. The fact that these confrontations remained largely hidden for so long underscores how meticulously the royal family managed its public narrative. For years, the truth lay buried under official communiques, controlled appearances, and selective leaks. Only through quiet testimonies from insiders and slowly emerging details did we come to appreciate the depth of Diana's plight. She was not just a glamorous figure on magazine covers. She was a woman caught in an institution unprepared to embrace change. Her pleas for understanding, her defiance of unspoken rules, and her willingness to stand her ground in private meetings offered a glimpse into the cost of maintaining an idealized image. In her feud with the Queen, Diana dared to challenge the monarchy's emotional detachment. In her altercation with Prince Philip, she confronted the raw expectation that she remain compliant in the face of personal distress. Princess Diana's life behind palace doors was far from the glamorous fairy tale that millions believed it to be. Even before the cracks in her marriage to King Charles appeared on the public stage, intense and emotionally draining conflicts were unfolding away from prying eyes. One of the most painful chapters in Diana's story revolved around her silent but relentless feud with Camilla Parker Bowles, King Charles's longtime confidant and later partner. Contrary to popular belief, their rivalry did not simply arise after Diana and Charles separated. Instead, it began simmering early on, from almost the moment Diana entered the family and realized that another woman's shadow loomed large in her marriage. Historians of the modern monarchy have often noted that the British royal family functioned within a strict code of emotional restraint. Yet Diana, a young woman seeking genuine affection and reciprocity, found herself tormented by the knowledge that Camilla's influence remained constant in Charles's life. This was no mere jealousy or insecurity. Diana felt betrayed on a fundamental level, as though the vows and traditions that were supposed to shield their union meant nothing when confronted with an old flame's enduring hold. Behind the scenes, these two women engaged in a fierce but largely unspoken competition. Neither staged public showdowns. The Crown's protocols discouraged such direct drama in full public view. Instead, the tension seethed in private encounters, stolen glances at royal events, whispered remarks, the careful avoidance of certain topics and places where their paths might cross. In these hushed corridors, the rivalry took on a raw and personal dimension that insiders would only dare to speak about years later. According to some who moved in these circles, Diana eventually found the courage and anger necessary to break the silence. At a private gathering attended by a select few members of the aristocratic and royal orbit, Diana allegedly confronted Camilla directly, accusing her of shattering the sanctity of her marriage, of intruding upon the emotional space Diana so desperately wanted to secure for herself and Charles. Although details remained scarce and most were too fearful or loyal to speak openly, the accounts that have emerged paint a scene of quiet devastation. Imagine a grand residence, candlelight reflecting off polished silverware, the murmur of subdued conversation suddenly stilled as Diana stood her ground, voicing what everyone sensed but no one dared name. This confrontation, brief and intense, did not solve the problem. Rather, it underscored the poignant truth. No crown, no title, no centuries-old tradition could protect her from heartbreak inflicted by those closest to her. But the emotional entanglements did not end with unfaithful husbands and rival lovers. Diana's battles extended to how she would raise her children, an area where she dared to challenge long-established norms that had governed royal child-rearing for generations. As a mother, Diana found herself fighting against a set of values and expectations that felt archaic and devoid of warmth. The royal family had long maintained strict guidelines on raising heirs and spares, treating them with a formality and distance meant to prepare them for a life of duty and public service. This had historically meant minimal public displays of affection, limited exposure to the broader world, and an early indoctrination into ceremonial and representational roles. Yet Diana wanted something profoundly different for Prince William and Prince Harry. She envisioned a childhood more aligned with the late 20th century ethos, one where empathy and direct experience out in the real world took precedence over stuffy formality. Rather than confine William and Harry within palace walls and stiff protocols, Diana believed in letting them taste ordinary life. She brought them to amusement parks where they could laugh without restraint, introduced them to hospital wards where they could learn compassion firsthand, and exposed them to charitable causes like homelessness shelters, so they might understand suffering and kindness at a young age. To some in the royal household, these activities bordered on scandalous. There was a fear that allowing the future king and his brother to see too much of the ordinary world might strip away the mystique so carefully preserved by centuries of tradition. Senior advisors, accustomed to heirs who were shaped in a quiet vacuum of formality, looked on with unease as Diana dissolved the invisible barriers between prince and populace. Her approach incited more than mild discomfort. There were heated debates behind gilded doors. King Charles, shaped by his own traditional upbringing, was uncertain about this new parenting style, which seemed to undermine what he had always been taught about the dignity and remoteness of the crown. Senior family members, raised in an era where stoicism and emotional distance were considered virtues, whispered that Diana was overstepping her role. They believed the young princess had no right to bend centuries of custom just because she felt strongly about it. Diana, however, refused to capitulate. She had witnessed the emotional toll of a stifled upbringing on Charles and other royals, and she was determined that her sons would not bear the same scars. The resulting friction was intense. It was not simply a disagreement about bedtimes or schools. It was a clash over the very philosophy of monarchy in a modern world. This tension placed Diana on a collision course with established power structures. She was pushing for a future where princes could be both regal and empathetic, both leaders and compassionate human beings. That she faced resistance was hardly surprising. Every tradition resists reformation, and the British monarchy is perhaps one of the most enduring traditions in Western civilization. Yet she persisted, and in doing so, she raised a fundamental question. Could the monarchy adapt to changing times and expectations, or would it remain locked in a cycle of distant grandeur? While she was adored by countless onlookers outside palace gates, her relationships behind closed doors could be markedly colder and more complex. Among the more tense and delicate relationships Diana navigated was the one with Princess Anne, Queen Elizabeth's only daughter. Unlike Diana, whose every step, smile, and gesture sent the public into waves of admiration, Princess Anne represented a different facet of royal life. Known for her no-nonsense attitude, Anne staunchly embraced royal duties without courting the media's favor. She consistently preferred to stay away from the intense glare of press attention, focusing instead on hard work, quiet perseverance, and loyalty to the institution itself rather than to public adoration. From the moment Diana entered the family, these two women embodied contrasting ideals, setting the stage for underlying friction. Diana's approach to royal life was revolutionary in its own subtle way. She understood the evolving media landscape of the late 20th century and harnessed public fascination to shine a spotlight on humanitarian causes. She used her popularity to champion neglected issues, empathizing with people in a way that broke down centuries-old barriers of aloofness. Princess Anne, raised in a stricter era and influenced by a traditional interpretation of royalty, seemed to regard such openness with skepticism. Insiders observed that Anne considered Diana's deep connection with the media superficial, a kind of charm offensive that, in Anne's eyes, verged on unbecoming behavior for a royal. To Anne, the monarchy's strength lay in its stoicism, its ability to stand above the daily clamor of headlines and to endure through quiet duty, not attention-grabbing flair. From Diana's perspective, Anne's stance appeared distant, even icy. While the public might have expected all royal women to stand together, supporting each other through the burdens of scrutiny, Diana reportedly found Anne's demeanor guarded and unwelcoming. Whenever the two appeared at royal events, the differences were palpable. Diana's warmth and magnetism drew eyes and cameras, while Anne preferred a lower profile, adhering to tradition and protocol. These dueling approaches made it nearly impossible for the two princesses to find common ground. Over time, their relationship never thawed. Instead, it remained a source of discomfort within the royal circle, a quiet rivalry born not of personal betrayal, but of fundamentally divergent philosophies about what it meant to be royal in an age of media saturation and shifting public expectations. Yet Diana's struggles with acceptance and support extended beyond personal rivalries to battles with the very machinery that shaped the monarchy's image. Deep within the workings of the royal institution was a powerful entity, the royal family's press office. Historically, this body functioned as the guardian of the monarchy's image, controlling what information flowed to the public and what remained behind gilded doors. Before Diana's arrival, the press office was accustomed to a more predictable dynamic. The monarchy did not bend to the press, it dictated terms. Information was released sparingly, focused on ceremonial duties, state visits, and traditional philanthropy. Scandals or personal vulnerabilities rarely, if ever, saw the light of day. The British press, though relentless, was long accustomed to these unwritten rules, and the palace's fortress-like stance generally held firm. Diana's entry into the scene, however, dramatically altered this balance of power. Initially beloved by the press and the public alike, she quickly realized that the royal press office was far more concerned with safeguarding the monolithic reputation of the crown than defending her personal dignity or struggles. As her marriage to Charles began to fracture, Diana recognized that protecting her own narrative meant stepping outside the royal echo chamber. She was not content to let others define her story. Instead, she took unprecedented steps to communicate directly with the press, sharing her perspective, her pain, and her hopes with a world eager to listen. This was revolutionary and deeply unsettling for those who managed the palace's communications. The press office had never faced a family member so willing to engage journalists on her own terms. Diana became adept at passing on her version of events, sometimes through carefully chosen intermediaries, other times by giving interviews that sent shockwaves through the monarchy. While this approach was risky, it also resonated with a public tired of impersonal palace statements. People craved authenticity and emotion. Diana gave them both, weaving her personal narrative into the larger story of the royal family. From the palace's perspective, Diana's tactics represented a breach of protocol and a challenge to their authority. The press office tried to rein her in, issuing behind-the-scenes admonishments and deploying more formal spin to counteract her revelations. But the old methods of control no longer worked in a media environment supercharged by paparazzi and an increasingly global audience. Diana's charisma, vulnerability, and relatability made her a media powerhouse. Attempts to silence or overshadow her were doomed from the start. The more the press office struggled to contain her, the more it became evident that the monarchy's old guard had met an adversary it could not tame, a princess who understood the press better than they did, and who was unafraid to use that understanding to defend her own truth. This conflict between Diana and the royal press office was no mere public relations squabble. It reflected a deeper battle over who had the right to define the meaning of royalty in a changing world. Traditionally, the monarchy dictated a narrative of calm continuity, moral rectitude, and unquestioned dignity. The press office served as both gatekeeper and storyteller, ensuring that the public saw only what upheld the crown's mystique. Yet Diana's willingness to share her private anguish and struggles, her humanity, rewrote the script. She showed that the royals, for all their splendor, were people who could suffer, love, and despair like anyone else. This newfound authenticity endeared her further to the masses, but it rattled the palace establishment. Princess Diana's role in the royal family cannot be understood by simply looking at the grand state occasions or her sparkling public appearances. Underlying much of her time in that gilded world were profound tensions and ideological clashes that few outside the palace walls ever fully grasped. Among the most striking points of contention was the intense friction that emerged over her approach to charity work. Traditionally, members of the royal family engaged with a select list of charities, dutifully attending galas, fundraisers, and well-established philanthropic endeavors. But Diana was not satisfied with adhering to long-standing precedents that kept a comfortable distance between royals and those they claimed to help. Instead, she dove headlong into issues that were still considered sensitive, even controversial, during that era. Rather than limit herself to hosting formal tea parties for the socially acceptable charities, Diana openly championed causes that many in her circle found unsettling. At a time when fear and misunderstanding surrounded HIV/AIDS, Diana was photographed shaking hands, indeed even embracing individuals affected by the disease. This simple human gesture shattered deeply ingrained stigmas. In her eyes, compassion meant crossing the invisible lines that society drew around suffering. Similarly, she took on homelessness and visited shelters, bringing attention to a problem that had often been swept under the rug. And perhaps most dramatically, Diana committed herself to the global effort to eradicate landmines, traveling to former war zones where the threat of unexploded ordnance still haunted communities long after conflicts ended. This direct, hands-on activism sent shock waves through the royal establishment. Many within those hallowed halls felt her actions were overshadowing the traditional, carefully balanced portfolio of royal charitable engagements. They whispered that Diana's personal crusades were pulling the spotlight away from the Queen and other family members, who adhered more closely to long-standing protocols. Some insiders suggested that jealousy simmered beneath the surface. Diana's global influence, heightened by her relatability and lack of fear in challenging taboos, threatened the well-tended equilibrium of royal appearances. For centuries, royals had acted as distant patrons, offering their support from a respectful arm's length. Diana's approach blurred the lines, making some advisors and relatives uncomfortable with this new form of emotional leadership. As Diana's popularity soared, the disquiet only intensified. She became not just a beloved figure, but an international symbol of empathy and reform. Each time, the cameras captured her, holding the hand of a patient with AIDS or comforting a child in a dangerous environment. The monarchy's more detached style of philanthropy looked outdated and insufficient. She was influencing public expectations about what royalty could and should do. This caused tension, and in some corners of the palace, people worried that if Diana's methods continued unchecked, it would be hard to revert to the old norms once she was no longer in the picture. Beyond her charitable work, Diana's personal battles extended into other, more privately guarded arenas of royal life. Consider her relationship with King Charles's closest friends, a circle that long predated Diana's arrival and was loyal to him above all else. These individuals, steeped in tradition and privilege, had known Charles before he ever met his future bride. Many among them supported his ongoing affair with Camilla Parker Bowles. From Diana's perspective, this betrayal was twofold. Not only did her husband fail to uphold the integrity of their marriage, but those closest to him openly endorsed or facilitated his infidelity. It did not take long for Diana to confront these supporters head-on. In private gatherings, away from the public's eager gaze, she challenged those who defended Charles's affair, demanding to know how they could stand by and watch as her marriage and emotional well-being crumbled. One particular dinner party confrontation stands out as a flashpoint. In the midst of polite conversation and flowing wine, Diana's voice cut through the facade. She accused some of Charles's friends of enabling his wrongdoing, of encouraging his liaison with Camilla, and ignoring the suffering it caused her. The tension in the room was palpable, leaving guests stunned by the princess's boldness. This clash further isolated Diana from Charles's social circle. It underscored the harsh truth that she and Charles, despite living under the same roof, were worlds apart. He had his long-standing allies. She had her vulnerability and courage. The gap between their emotional worlds widened with every such confrontation, making it clear that unity, at least in private, was an illusion. And then there was the Queen Mother, a figure revered by the public as a gentle grandmotherly presence who had guided the monarchy through challenging decades. Behind the public facade of warmth and tradition, Diana's relationship with the Queen Mother was far chillier than anyone would have guessed. The Queen Mother, who had been a bedrock of continuity for decades, reportedly viewed Diana as a disruptive force, a princess who did not respect the old ways and who brought too much personal emotion to the forefront. When Diana's marriage to Charles began to disintegrate, the Queen Mother stood firmly on Charles's side, showing little sympathy for Diana's plight. This stance deepened Diana's feelings of isolation. She had hoped, perhaps naively, for understanding and counsel from someone who had witnessed countless chapters of royal history. Instead, she found a resolute adherence to the status quo, a reminder that in the monarchy's long memory, tradition outweighed individual suffering. In private moments, the Queen Mother's disapproval became evident, sending a clear signal that Diana's attempts to redefine royal engagement, whether through her humanitarian efforts or her insistence on emotional honesty, were not welcome. This only magnified Diana's sense of being an outsider. For a woman who craved genuine emotional support, this lack of empathy was devastating. It is easy for outsiders to underestimate the psychological toll of these hidden battles. To the public, Diana was the radiant people's princess, but within the palace she often felt emotionally abandoned, penned in by traditions that did not bend to her will or recognize her pain. Princess Diana's presence in the royal family was never a simple story of glitz and ceremony. Underneath the tiaras and polite smiles lay deeper tensions that challenged centuries-old customs. Perhaps nowhere was this more evident than in her subtle but determined rebellion against royal protocol. The British monarchy, long anchored by rigid tradition, expected its members to follow an unspoken code of formality in public life. Limited physical contact, minimal displays of personal warmth, and a carefully maintained emotional distance. But Diana could not abide by such constraints. She saw herself not just as a figurehead, but as a human being uniquely positioned to bring comfort and compassion to people's lives. Where other royals might offer a polite nod, Diana offered hugs, handshakes, and earnest conversations. She dared to approach the public not as subjects, but as fellow humans who deserved kindness and direct engagement. To some in the family's inner circle, Diana's approach amounted to nothing short of heresy. Senior royals and their advisors viewed each departure from protocol, her casual gestures, her heartfelt laughter, her instinct to hold the hand of a stranger, as an erosion of the monarchy's mystique. Why should a princess behave like a warm neighbor rather than a distant icon? Behind closed doors, heated discussions ensued. Advisors and senior family members implored her to conform, to remember that formality was the armor that had protected the monarchy through wars, scandals, and shifting cultural tides. But Diana, empathic and resolute, persisted. In her mind, the royal title was not a barrier, but a bridge. And if connecting authentically with people bent a few rules, so be it. The resulting clashes were not minor tiffs. They were battles of ideology and identity, with Diana's sincerity pitted against centuries of carefully choreographed aloofness. Yet Diana's struggle was not confined to outward expressions of warmth. Inside the palace walls, she grappled with feelings of isolation and misunderstanding, a reality that surfaces vividly in the secret letters she wrote to a close circle of friends. These letters, later revealed through biographies and documentaries, offered a window into the private anguish of a woman who, despite her global fame and public adoration, felt desperately alone. She spoke of her anger and sadness at how senior royals treated her with cold detachment, of her frustration at being perceived as an outsider despite marrying into this illustrious family. The People's Princess, adored by millions, found herself in an emotional desert at home, struggling to reconcile the radiant persona she projected for the cameras with the emotional neglect she endured when the lenses were turned off. In these letters, Diana bared her soul. She described feeling like a stranger even in her own marriage, unwelcome in a family that often prioritized loyalty to the crown over genuine human connection. The discrepancy between her public image, smiling, compassionate, relatable, and her private sorrow revealed the hidden costs of royal life. This was not the world of fairy tales and storybooks. It was a place where emotional warmth was rationed, where genuine understanding could be elusive, and where one's mental well-being did not necessarily rank high among royal priorities. Her private writings stand as evidence of a princess waging a quiet internal war to maintain her sense of self in an environment that could be openly hostile to individuality and vulnerability. Another dimension of Diana's struggle lay in her strained relationship with King Charles's extended family, a facet of her experience often overshadowed by her well-publicized difficulties with Charles himself. From the beginning, many of Charles's relatives greeted her with suspicion. They saw her as an intruder, a young woman plucked from a more ordinary life and thrust into their world of protocol and precedence. Diana's natural openness, emotional candor, and modern approach to public engagements did not align with the rigid worldview of certain family members who prized conformity and silence. As the cracks in her marriage became more visible, several of Charles's relatives reportedly sided firmly with him, reinforcing her role as an unwelcome outsider. This reluctance among Charles's kin to intervene or even to acknowledge the turmoil fueled by his ongoing relationship with Camilla Parker Bowles intensified Diana's sense of isolation. She watched as the people who might have offered support stood aside, choosing not to challenge established hierarchies or question Charles's behavior. Their inaction was a painful confirmation that tradition and loyalty to the existing power structure overshadowed empathy. This attitude only widened the gulf between Diana and the extended royal family, making every encounter more awkward and distant. For her, these tensions were a reminder that behind the ornate facades and stately rituals lay a world where loyalty to the crown took precedence over the emotional needs of its members, where personal relationships were often sacrificed on the altar of stability. Diana arrived at a time when the monarchy, an institution that had survived world wars and shifting empires, was grappling with the demands of a rapidly changing society. The late 20th century was not the age of unquestioned deference to aristocratic families. It was an era of mass media, rising individualism, and a public increasingly interested in sincerity and emotional resonance. Diana's rebellious kindness, her candid revelations to trusted friends, and her bitterness over an unresponsive network of in-laws were not isolated events. They were flashes of lightning illuminating the tension between tradition and transformation, between a stable past and an unpredictable future. The friction she encountered was a symptom of a monarchy at a crossroads, forced to choose between evolving with the times or clinging to familiar patterns. These stories of protocols challenged, letters written in quiet desperation, and stilted encounters with skeptical relatives offer a richer, more dramatic narrative than a simple account of palace gossip. They reveal a princess who, while never formally rejecting the crown's authority, subtly undermined its unquestioned supremacy by insisting on the value of heartfelt connection. They show a woman who believed the monarchy had both the duty and the capacity to evolve, to become more compassionate, more engaged, and more honest. Her persistence in the face of resistance was courageous, even if she often paid a heavy emotional price for it. Late in her marriage, as she found herself increasingly cornered and unsupported, Diana reached a point where silent endurance was no longer possible. In a remarkable and risky move, she issued an ultimatum to the royal family, a shocking gesture from someone many expected to remain compliant and gracious. Feeling trapped in a loveless marriage and increasingly sidelined by the wider royal institution, Diana insisted that her struggles be acknowledged and that she be granted more agency over her public and private role. This demand, whispered about in palace corridors, ran counter to the monarchy's long-held principle that outsiders, no matter how beloved by the people, should never attempt to reshape the hierarchy or question the authority of senior royals. It was an almost unimaginable moment, a princess challenging centuries of tradition and power from within. The reaction was immediate and uneasy. Shock, resistance, and swift dismissal by many senior royals who believed that an institution older than any living memory could not bend to one person's emotional distress. Yet for Diana, making this stand marked a pivotal turning point. Here was a rare instance where she openly confronted the very machinery that had sought to define and confine her since the day she stepped into the limelight. This internal crisis did not stop at palace politics. It trickled down into everyday life, affecting even Diana's interactions with household staff. While Diana found a deep and genuine bond with the public, embracing ordinary people and showing compassion that transcended formalities, her relationship with the royal household staff was often markedly colder. Many staff members had long pledged their loyalty to King Charles, and as his marriage with Diana unraveled, they found themselves caught uncomfortably in the crossfire. Some aligned openly with Charles's perspective, reflecting the gravitational pull of an heir to the throne and underscoring the notion that royal employees should serve the continuity and stability of the monarchy rather than empathize with an individual's plight. From Diana's vantage point, this felt like a betrayal within her own home. The staff's perceived partiality deepened her isolation, making the very place meant to be a refuge feel like another stage upon which she had to perform. As Diana became more independent, shaping her own media narrative and distancing herself from traditional royal protocols, these underlying tensions intensified. Staff, already unsettled by her unorthodox approach, struggled to reconcile their duty to the royal household with Diana's evolving image. The resulting chill in these relationships was yet another battlefield where Diana fought for a semblance of control, further illustrating how her conflicts were not restricted to public figures or senior royals, but extended to the very people who managed her daily life. Amid these countless struggles, Diana's fierce protectiveness as a mother stands out as one of her most defining and sympathetic qualities. Nowhere was this more evident than in the quiet, private feud that arose over the role of her younger son, Prince Harry, within the monarchy. Royal tradition placed the eldest son, Prince William, under the brightest spotlight, molding him as the future king and immersing him early in the intricacies of royal duty. Historically, younger siblings often grew up in the shadow of the heir. their roles less clearly defined, and their significance seemingly diminished over time. But Diana refused to accept that fate for Harry. She wanted both her sons to receive equal emotional support, love, and personal attention, an insistence that was strikingly modern, reflecting the broader societal shift towards valuing emotional intelligence and personal development over rigid hierarchies. Some royal advisors, deeply entrenched in the old ways, resisted Diana's pleas. They believed that preparing William for kingship should remain the family's priority, and that Harry's role was simply to support the future monarch. For Diana, this attitude was crushing, as she feared that her younger son would feel like an afterthought, a mere spare to the heir. Her determination to protect Harry's emotional well-being and ensure he felt cherished and valued placed her at odds with a system that had rarely considered such matters worthy of debate. In this private yet profound struggle, Diana once again challenged the status quo, illustrating that true maternal love would not yield to tradition without a fight. Reflecting upon these undisclosed battles and personal dramas, her explosive ultimatum, her frosty relations with household staff loyal to the old order, and her heartfelt defense of Harry's rightful place in the family, offers us a more intricate view of Diana's courage and complexity. She was navigating a labyrinth of unwritten rules and time-worn expectations, all while under the unrelenting gaze of a global audience. Her demands for acknowledgement and control were not born of selfish ambition, but from a need to preserve her own dignity and to humanize an institution that often seemed to value decorum above empathy. In standing her ground against the royal family's traditional circles, she demonstrated that even within the most time-honored establishments, individuals could still push for meaningful change. As we contemplate these lesser-known stories, we realize that Diana was more than a style icon or a media darling. She was a transformative figure who ventured into dangerous territory by insisting that personal feelings, moral fairness, and emotional nurturing mattered as much as duty, ceremony, and lineage. Her struggles prefigured many of the issues the monarchy would face in the 21st century, as subsequent generations grappled with how to remain relevant and relatable in a world that demands authenticity. Diana's capacity to challenge norms, to feel the pulse of the changing era, and to risk her own comfort for the sake of emotional truth helped lay the groundwork for a more openly empathetic dialogue about royalty's role in modern society. Diana's life, filled with challenges that few of us could fathom, continues to inspire awe, not just because of her grace and elegance, but because of her resilience in the face of seemingly insurmountable odds. What might have seemed like small domestic quarrels or personal pleas were, in fact, clarion calls for a new understanding of what royalty could be. Her strength endures in memory precisely because she refused to be subsumed by an institution that tried to script her every move. Instead, she wrote her own lines in this centuries-old play, leaving us to admire her determination and wonder what more she might have achieved had circumstances allowed her to continue shaping the narrative. So, which of these stories surprised you the most? Did you know about Diana's ultimatum or the silent battles she waged to give Prince Harry his own place in the royal firmament? Perhaps some of these accounts were entirely new to you, shedding fresh light on the extraordinary complexities of a life lived under the world's scrutiny. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Share your reflections in the comments below. If you found this exploration enlightening, don't forget to hit that like button, share this video with friends who may appreciate these insights, and subscribe to our channel. Make sure to turn on notifications so you won't miss any future deep dives into the hidden histories and untold stories that continue to captivate and intrigue us all. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.